going to share screen. Welcome to you all. I think we'll get straight into it. So welcome to you all. We've got a pretty tight program today, so I'm just going to kick things off right away. And to do that, I want to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on many diverse and unceded Aboriginal lands today. I'm coming to you from beautiful Awabakal country here at the University of Newcastle's Callaghan campus. And our presenters today are spread all across the country. We have people attending, or at least registered to attend, from every state and territory. It'd be great if you'd like to pop your name in the chat and the lands that you're joining from, to introduce yourselves and to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all these lands, the elders past, present, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues here today. My name's Tom Carey. I'm the Media and Stakeholder Relations Specialist for the Teachers and Teaching Research Centre here at the University of Newcastle. For a number of years, there's been a serious push for education researchers to do the challenging and often unfunded work of making their research findings both accessible and meaningful for teachers, for principals, and crucially for policymakers who have the power to influence and affect real change in schools. At the height of the teacher shortage crisis in 2023, a number of major national research projects exploring kind of some really key challenges in the teacher workforce space were funded by the Australian Research Council and the Australian government. The Teachers and Teaching Research Centre was leading one of these projects, or is leading one of these projects currently, and at the time proposed bringing together this powerhouse group of education experts. And from that first meeting back in 2023, the Teacher Attention Network was formed. It was formed to create a forum to share insights from these distinct but interrelated research projects, and to create a platform for sharing findings and the recommendations that their research kind of made more widely to a diverse audience. This network's become something of a model for how researchers can collaborate across independently funded projects. In this case, as an issue-specific collaboration, seeking to better understand and influence systemic responses to a shared policy challenge at a really critical moment for schooling in Australia. So today's webinar is the second of three collective outputs the Teacher Attention Network is producing. The first, which I hope some of you have hopefully had the chance to review, was a series of two-page policy briefings on each of the projects that the Attention Network published at the end of last month. The third and final output from the Teacher Attention Network is proposed to be a joint special issue publication later this year for a more academic audience. But today we're going to hear from 6 researchers delivering approximately 5-minute presentations. And these are each of the groups that have been involved in the Teacher Retention Networks. These presentations will run rapid fire, one after another, and at the end we'll do a Q&A. We'd love for you to use the chat function to discuss what you're hearing or to share insights or comments as you go. But if you have any questions for our panelists, please put that in the Q&A box. You should be able to access that at the toolbar on the bottom of your screen. You can upvote other people's questions that you like. You should be able to comment on those as well, I hope. And if you have a question for a specific researcher or based on a specific project, please flag that in your question so that we can manage that at the back end. But yeah, without further ado, to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to Tim Delaney to talk about their project on principals' emotional labour in volatile times. So thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tom, and hi everyone. It's great to be here. It's always a privilege to come together with a collective of educators who are, interested in some of the more challenging issues that we're all confronting in our work. As the title of this presentation suggests, I'm looking at principles emotional labour, and I'm representing the Chief Investigator of this ARC project, Jane Wilkinson, who is not able to be here today. Just before I kind of move into the guts of the slide, the volatile times, this was put into our grant application 4 years ago, and obviously we settled on the wave in our slide deck that we've been using over the course of the project. It might still be the appropriate metaphor, although things have become a lot more volatile since we started this project, as we all are aware. The project is a large project across the whole of Australia. I won't sort of go into too many details about the method, but you can see that we've connected with quite a lot of principals through critical incident testimonies, many stakeholders, some of whom are on the call today. So, a big thank you to all of those principals and stakeholders who've contributed to our research over the last 3 years. It's enabled us to develop some fairly, sort of important findings, I guess. There's quite a few of them on the screen there, and I won't read through all of them, but I guess just to sort of highlight the first couple to start off with, we saw through all of our data that reports of violence are very prevalent, and as are, the psychosocial concerns that principals raise relating to their work. So the testimonies, they were anonymous testimonies that were entered on a website, almost 300 as we saw. Many of them detailed emotional labour that required significant amounts of stress. One type of labour that we saw a lot of was caring for students, caring for families, and caring for many people in their community. Interrogating this data more deeply with some of the researchers, including Joan Tronto and Kathleen Lynch, we did note that principals themselves are not as cared for as perhaps they should be if we want to have a sustainable principal workforce. So they do a lot of caring, but they're not well cared for by the system. In contrast, principals also reported in their data that they felt nourished by opportunities to care with other people. So collective opportunities for care was something that came out in the data. Principals reported that, if we moved on to number 3, that it's important work. Emotional labour is important work, but it is not necessarily recognised by the system in ways that perhaps it should be. And just a third sort of thing to focus on here is the number 6, the rural, remote and low SES school principals. Some of the emotional work, the work that involves really connecting with communities, particularly in the context of, say, climate emergencies. These are some really harrowing things that we've been reading, and obviously it makes us think carefully about the sorts of supports that are provided to those principals in those settings. In terms of recommendations, there's 10 on the screen here. We could have come up with a few more than this, but just again to focus on a few of them. Embedding psychosocial risks and principal wellbeing into role descriptions. We saw examples where principals were actually working collectively. They were actually working with their systems to, for example, understand the work health and safety legislation and how it might support principals as opposed to teachers when they are in hazards or where there are injuries. Interestingly, with our case study data and our testimony data, principals reported not ever really wanting to report those injuries or those hazards. And so they're effectively putting themselves at risk of burnout for not wanting to actually do that reporting. So our recommendation is that there needs to be some work done in that space. Secondly, we saw quite a few examples of principals who were able to organise themselves in networks to access things like clinical peer supervision, so effectively psychological support in peer groups. So this is number 5. And where we saw that happening, we saw the principals were reporting some positive outcomes for that. So that's a resource that I think we think should be expanded on. But in a nutshell, just to sort of summarise, we could see that what's needed, the next step is measures to make the support or to visibilise the emotional labour that principals are actually doing, and also more infrastructures to provide supports that enable principals to work collaboratively with other principals, but with other leaders in the system, to kind of engage with the really complex and tricky emotional work that they're doing. And I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Tim. That was fabulous. All right, I'm going to hand over to Laureate Professor Jenny Gore to present on strengthening induction for quality teaching rounds.
Try again, I was on mute. This project, unlike many of the others really, is an intervention study. So we've tried to do something that we hoped would have an impact on the experiences of induction that teachers are having around the country. It was funded by the federal government and involving colleagues here, and also Nicole Mockler from Sydney Uni. You can read about that in the paper. We have had in this project more than 1,000 teachers from more than 250 schools involved. They come from every state and territory across the country, depicted there by the dots. They also come from every one of the sectors. So this was also a cross-sectoral project. Interestingly, we've had, I guess, fewer Catholic schools involved than you might anticipate. Despite being an intervention study, because we're collecting baseline data, we're actually able to say some things about the state of induction. And I think one of the really interesting findings is that induction experience tend to vary more by school than by state or sector. And this has a lot to do with the leadership, but also the conditions that exist in different schools. We found that in terms of what the induction's about, it's mainly in the form of orientation, accreditation, or classroom management, often kind of those more technical aspects of teaching than focused on teachers' core business of pedagogy. We found that reduced hours and mentoring are the most common supports that are provided, but these usually stop during or at the end of the first year, and certainly once accreditation at the proficient level of the standards is achieved. And we also found that while hierarchical relationships in the form often of a mentor, mentee, or supervisor can actually support the induction experience, it can also limit teacher autonomy and opportunities for collaborative growth. In terms of the impact of quality teaching rounds, each of these lines represents, with the error bars either side, represent the kind of pre to post phase. And this is the data that we have at the moment. The project's actually ongoing for about another year. These are teachers who've completed all of the beginning of the pre and post surveys. What you see here is that teacher efficacy goes up quite significantly, statistically significantly, for early career teachers, but also for the experienced teachers who are participating with them. So in groups of 4, we have at least 2 early career teachers. We define that as in their first 3 years of full-time equivalent practice, and at least 1 more experienced teachers in each group of 4 when they do their quality teaching rounds, which I won't be explaining at all here. So what you see is the early career teachers get great growth, but the more experienced teachers get almost equivalent growth in overall effective practice and also the subscales of efficacy, which are classroom management, instructional strategies, and couldn't see that last one, what was that? Student engagement. We also found impact on teacher wellbeing. So burnout reducing, which is what we want to see, particularly for the early career teachers, shared vision, trust, and wellbeing all going up. So certainly seeing those positive effects. Importantly for retention, when we asked teachers if they had any intention to leave the profession within the next 6 months. So these are people who are pretty much out the door if they're talking about the next 6 months, because we know that it takes quite a while before people actually put the plans in place to leave. 24% of our sample said they were intending to leave. I mean, thankfully, 76% had no intention. If we just look at that 24%, after doing quality teaching rounds, we see a statistically significant reduction in intention to leave. So again, another positive effect of participation in quality teaching rounds. Our key recommendation, whether people choose to do rounds or other forms of support, that we really need to strengthen the inductions experience across Australian schools by building teachers' capacity beyond the kind of technical and basic requirements that seem to dominate at the moment. If we want teachers not only to stay in teaching, but to be successful, confident, really capable teachers, then it's really important that we are clear about what the focus of the induction experience is. We also need to make sure the support structures that are in place are more consistent for early career teachers across the country, because they are so haphazard or ad hoc. And importantly, we think collaborative rather than hierarchical environments are really important in supporting teacher induction, and that aligns with a lot of the other, I guess, recent recommendations coming out of studies of teacher professional development, that collaboration can be much more powerful than those hierarchical structures. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Our next presenter is Dr. Amy McPherson, who's going to present on the impact of teacher turnover on those who remain. So Amy, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. So my name is Amy McPherson. I'm from the School of Education and the Teachers and Teaching Research Centre at the University of Newcastle. I'm presenting on behalf of our team, including Professor Jo Lampert from Monash University, on our project Still Standing. I didn't realise we've got phased in ones too. Over the past 3 years, I guess there's been plenty of attention on teacher shortages, but I think it's particularly important to emphasise that recent OECD reports have shown that the number of Australian school leaders indicating that shortages have impacted instructional quality has increased significantly. Our ARC Discovery project has been an ethnographic case study designed to examine the lived experiences of teachers working in hard-to-staff schools during a period of unprecedented workforce shortages. So through this qualitative research, we've aimed to present illustrative examples of how schools are responding to the teacher shortage crisis. While some are critical, I guess, of the role of small-scale qualitative work, we want to emphasise that the benefits of these projects are that they're capable of understanding context and lived experience in a really nuanced way. Our case studies have been in 9 schools across 3 Australian states. They've been in schools with ICSEA values below 1,000. They've all been geographically diverse, from metropolitan to remote, and have focused predominantly on secondary schools, so 7 to 10 high schools with some P or K to 12 and some primary schools. We've been into schools for up to a week, interviewing and work shadowing both teachers and school leaders. And importantly, about 80% of our participants have worked in schools for more than 5 years, so it doesn't have an early career teacher focus. Our project has really been designed to emphasise the voice of teachers and leaders in hard-to-staff schools, so what they say is going on and how they see the problems. And in our 5 minutes today, we wanted to emphasise the dimension of retention that's part of this project, which is distinct from the way that schools manage the crisis and also from the intentions to leave and teacher attrition discourse. We call these participants, our stayers. And our stayers tell us that they stay for a number of really important reasons. Mostly they talk about collegiality, the absolute central importance of supportive colleagues and school leaders. And they live in the communities that they love. They live and work in communities that they love. These people are highly committed professionals. They talk a lot about teacher commitment. It's discussed in terms of an emphasis on hard work, of wanting to stick it out, and of a commitment to public education. Olga says here that I've been part of the change at this school. And so I think it's almost like you want to stick it out because you want to be part of this change. I could find a job elsewhere if I wanted to, but I've worked really hard to build the music program to where it is now, and I don't want to just drop that and run. Teachers stay because of incentives, but incentives are a rather complex story in relation to teacher retention. Money is important, but recruitment incentives don't always attract the right people in the right locations. Instead, incentives in relation to retention tell a very complicated story that play out over the life course of teachers' careers, and they intersect with issues such as housing, part-time and flexible work, maternity leave provisions and childcare, and lifestyle. So the big picture of teacher retention is that it exists in a precarious balance with working conditions. Melanie sums this up for us. At this point, I go back and forward every day, and I know I can't keep doing this amount of workload without burning myself out. I want to stay in education. I love education. I love the public school system. But if it keeps going on like this, I just can't do it. A core insight from our project is that in addition to the teacher workload intensification arguments, there are a large number of schools managing the brunt of a teacher workforce crisis. This is not just a question of filling vacancies, although that's important. It's an acknowledgement of the impacts of high turnover, of limited access to casual relief teachers, which prevents sick leave and professional development opportunities. It's a reliance on early career teachers, permission to teach, and out-of-field teachers, which add to the complexities of school cultures. It's dealing with diminished recruitment pipelines and the cumulative effects on staff burnout and morale. Persistent workforce instability disrupts instructional continuity, it increases teacher workload, and undermines collegial relationships and organisational functioning across multiple dimensions of school life. By examining teachers' lived experiences within a broader ecological landscape, it becomes clear that workforce instability reflects structural pressures on the profession, pressures that require coordinated responses that range from school-level strategies to broader systems reform. And policy responses to teacher shortages indicate the need to integrate recruitment and workforce supply with much more emphasis on teacher retention, especially in hard-to-staff schools. So I'll pass over to Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. That was fabulous. Yes, Martin, over to you, please. This is Professor Martin Mills, who's going to talk to us about teacher education and retention.
And Reese is going to share the screen. We've got two presentations that run on from each other. So thanks, everyone. I'm Martin Mills from QUT. I'm presenting on behalf of our team on ARC teacher attraction and retention in hard-to-staff schools. We've got two projects, and Reese is going to follow on from me. And so we've got our PowerPoints together. So every time I say, thanks, Reese, it means move on to the next slide. So thanks, Reese. So that's the team there. I think some of those people are also online with Reese and I. Those of us at QUT are on Jagera and Turrbal land, unceded lands of the First Nations people there. I'd like to pay respects to any First Nations people that are on online in this meeting today. So thanks, Reese. So we've got 4 papers out of our project, and what I thought I'd do in our 5 minutes is just give you a bit of a sense of what's emerging from our research, what's been in those papers, and perhaps draw you to going and having a look at the papers. So they're the papers from this particular project. Thanks, Reese. The data sets which have informed those papers, there's 3 data sets. It's all of the research has been taken place in Queensland and Queensland government schools. We've been looking at recruitment strategies in Queensland. We've been talking with policy officers, senior policy officers, local union officers, senior union officers. We've been talking to local HR staffing officers as well in the different regions within Queensland. We've also been looking at policies both locally and in England, and I'll come to why England in a moment. So that's one set of data. We've been conducting case studies across schools in Queensland, regional, rural, remote, and culturally and linguistically diverse, high poverty metropolitan contexts. In those places, we've been doing interviews with principals and teachers, as well as focus groups with community and students, and document collection. As yet, we don't we haven't written much about the students, but it has been interesting talking to students in these schools where many of them have been shattered by the turnover. So they've talked about on a Friday having a teacher saying goodbye, and the next week that teacher's gone, and they had no inkling that the teacher was planning to leave or what was happening. The turnover is having a significant impact on students. That's for us yet to write about. We've also been doing these life history interviews online with early career teachers. We've been trying to track 25 of them over the 3 years of the project, which we're coming to the end of this year. Those narratives are, again, incredibly rich. They're still to be analysed. So the papers that we've been primarily talking about have been policy and interviews with the senior staff and some case study work. So thanks, Reece. So these are the I guess, talking points, if you like, some key considerations, things we've been thinking about as we've been undertaking this research. For us, the very, very famous Raewyn Connell quote that social justice isn't just an add-on to education, but fundamental to good education, is something that shaped all of our thinking and theorising around this issue. We've primarily used the work and talked about the work of Nancy Fraser and her understandings of economic, cultural and political justice. The schools, as Amy said, where some of these issues are hardest are in the really high poverty schools with low ICSEA, but they're also in schools with culturally diverse communities of very diverse communities. We also, the political justice, the sense of which people can have a say over issues that impact upon them. So that's both teachers and students. And these three areas of justice, economic, cultural and political, impact upon teachers as well, and people thinking about coming into teaching, thinking about coming in to do a 2-year master's if you're a career changer, which Reece will talk about in a moment, is an issue of economic justice. How do we fund those people to become teachers? And in one of the papers, you'll see we talk about this notion, Soja's notion of spatial justice. I think that, and the work of Will Letts, Bill Green, Phil Roberts on Simone on rural education really draws attention to the metrocentric policies that are in evidence in many states, and especially in Queensland. So for us, spatial justice has been a key consideration. Go about 5 minutes now. Why England and Australia? We've got the paper looking at English and Australian policy. I think we know that we borrow so much from the English context, but as Bomblingard has argued, we need to do policy learning. So we've worked quite closely with some of our colleagues, Jane Perryman, Chingu and Claire Brooks in the UK. The role of IT becomes significant, and we could say more about that. I can see I'm getting the hurry up. I don't know whether 5 minutes went. The other thing is right fit. So one of the papers we've got is where we've talked to staffing officers in Queensland, where these are local ones. We talk about trying to get teachers for a right fit, to make sure they fit with the local community. That's potentially problematic. But at the same time, it recognises that the local know the community. So there's some tensions around centralised and decentralised approaches to staffing. Judith Sachs has this wonderful paper, Teacher Professionalism, Why Are We Still Talking About It? I think we have to talk about it. It's so critical in this context of the teacher shortage issue. How are teachers being, it's all very well to get people into the profession and attract them, but keeping there becomes critical. And that's where we have to talk about teacher professionalism, which ties into Nancy Fraser's notion of political justice. Thanks, Tom. Reece.
Yeah, over to you, Reece, when you're ready to jump in. It's Associate Professor Reece Mills on addressing teacher shortages in Australia. And Reece, I'll just
Great, thanks. Yep, I'm all ready, and I think I nearly got a promotion from you there. Hi everyone, it's good to see familiar faces. So my name is Reese Mills. I work in the School of Education at RMIT University, and no relation to Martin. Uh, so yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk today. So I'm going to share some take-home messages from an ARC linkage grant that was awarded in 2023, and it's ongoing, and it's about career change teachers. So this is what our research group defined quite broadly or quite inclusively as individuals that enter the teaching profession older than 25 years of age, having come from a prior career, occupation, job, or even role, like, for example, parenting. So this was of interest to us because there's a lot of policy documents and now initial teacher education programs that valorize career change teachers as being a welcome, one welcome solution to teacher shortages. So this project was about better understanding their experiences with a view to enhance attraction and retention in the profession. Hopefully I can change my own slides now. Yep. So the research team is the same as the previous talk, but also we've got a partner investigator from the Queensland Teachers Union, Dr. Craig Wood. Being a linkage, it is cross-sectorial as well. So we've got the biggest employers, the Department of Education, Independent Schools Queensland, and Catholic Ed. We've also got the Queensland Teachers Union and our regulatory authority, the Queensland College of Teachers. So just a brief overview of the project. I suppose it's apparent from this slide that it was a Queensland-based project. It was comprised of three pillars, if you like: initial teacher education, schools and systems, and then career change teachers themselves as individuals. In terms of the initial teacher education pillar, we interviewed teacher educators and also career change pre-service teachers. In terms of schools and systems, we've conducted 5 case studies where we visited school sites and interviewed principals, deputy principals, career change teachers, students. In terms of career change teachers themselves as individuals, we conducted a survey. We had 345 career changers respond to that. And from that survey, we had 50 career change teachers agree to participate in a series of longitudinal interviews. So we've interviewed them 3 times over about 2 or 3 years. Here is some of the work that we've published coming out of this research project. You're welcome to follow up on any of those. If you can't get a hold of those or access them, please do email me. And like Martin, I just wanted to share some key considerations. So these would be what our team wants to spotlight from the policy document, the collection of policy briefings. The first point is that career change teachers are indeed a distinct occupational cohort. So we do get asked a little bit how some of our findings might be the same or different to teachers generally or broadly. And what is coming through in our data is that whilst many of the challenges are the same, they're actually felt more acutely by career changers because they're often entering teaching later in life. So they're juggling, they've got lots of different balls in the air that they're juggling. And that's worth considering across ITE and their beginning teaching journey. The next point is that career change teachers are not a homogenous group. So we often straight away think doctors, lawyers, engineers, but our research team would suggest that we need to think beyond those white-collared professionals. The diversity of prior careers really does blow you out of the water. And also we would remind folk that our career changes don't just go into postgraduate ITE pathways as well, so they can do undergraduate degrees. We would suggest that there's a huge investment in career changes in terms of their attraction, but actually more work needs to happen. Equal, if not more, attention needs to be paid to their retention. And just lastly, we would suggest that professionalism and contributive justice are important for this group. And so that means that they're able to participate in the school that they're working in, do meaningful teaching work, whether that's their experience, skills, and knowledge from their prior career, or just more broadly, like feeling valued or having their voice heard in decisions that concern them. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much for that, Reese. All right, so our final presenter this afternoon is Professor Simone White, who's going to share her research on supporting precariously employed early career teachers to manage student behaviour. Simone, hand over to you.
So much. Hopefully everyone can see that. Great. Lucky last. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. We're going to talk about another ARC discovery project, focused, as you can see here, on early career teachers. But unlike the one that Jenny shared, we're actually focusing on those who are casually employed as such, or sessionally employed, and sometimes we've called them precariously employed, and particularly in terms of their experiences of induction. So you'll see the team here, again, like the others, quite a broad team across many different institutions. So as I said, we're talking about early career teachers or beginning teachers, but this actually led us to a key finding in itself, a bit like what Reese was just talking about, that they're not a homogenous group in themselves as early career teachers, and that early career teachers themselves are becoming quite diverse, as career change teachers are just one example, and also a better understanding of what induction actually means. So while this project is very much focused on workforce, we've actually been able to tease out further who really is an early career teacher, precariously or casually employed, and what is induction. And in itself, as I said, these are key findings of the project. What we're finding, oops, what happened there? There we go. This gives you a quick snapshot on some of the diversity of early career teachers. Obviously, school leavers, career change teachers, as Reese just spoke about, international teachers, although they might be experienced in one context, they are perhaps deemed as early career teachers in another context. The rise of provisionally registered teachers, and also returning teachers, again, not necessarily classified as complete novices, but returning to a system that might be actually quite different and new. So in itself, we've sort of really tried to tease out further this group. Also, in terms of workforce needs, I think it's important for us to start to understand that the workforce is shifting and changing, and traditionally, when we thought about casual and sessional or precariously employed, it was those people who were not yet able to get a full-time position. But what we're actually noticing, in particularly this next generation of people taking up teaching, is that people are selecting this option, this choice, to be casually employed, to be sessionally employed. It's a choice rather than necessarily, just where they've found themselves landed. And so I think in terms of a workforce and how we think about induction and how we think about preparation and support, that this sort of shifts the ways we need to really count more in terms of those who are taking up this particular option, whether by design or not. So we need to think a bit more about this teaching workforce in flux, and these three notions here of teaching not necessarily being a lifelong career, multiple entry and exit points, and a greater desire for flexibility in their work conditions. As I said, we've teased out a further, not only the workforce and also the understanding of what it means to be a early career teacher, but we've also teased out, and Professor Anna Sullivan has just led a paper on this very frameworks that you can actually start to have a look at. But we've teased out induction. And so it really is a component of the onboarding, socialization and professional learning. We've got a series of enabling activities that really move the profession, as Martin talked about, the importance of the teacher profession to a vibrant career. So I think that this is an important finding in itself as well, around really to be more explicit about what the induction components are. So just like the other groups, we've got some key findings to date, and I'll give you a chance to have a look at those. I think starkly, our research to date has shown that over 1/4 of all early career teachers are still missing out on induction entirely, even if we think about that framework that we just presented there. So I think that this is a key area for workforce needs. Probably because of time, I can't go into all of those, but hopefully you can start to see the nuances of the importance of induction, mentoring. I think a lot of people have talked about mentoring and talked about the collegiality of the profession and the importance of being able to work closely with colleagues, even if they are sessionally employed and often are sort of seen as sometimes invisible in terms of the staff room and the school. So some key points to consider. Again, just to sort of help us all as a profession. So obviously retention is really important, but now we can sort of drill down more specifically on those that are in this particular category of sessionally or casually employed. And we urgently need to think about how current induction practices are supporting an increasingly diversifying workforce. So a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate in our modern teaching profession. Again, some key points. I realise that time is against us, so you can have a quick look there to sort of highlight again more the focus on induction and the teacher workforce. And importantly, we've used a particular tool, a human resource management tool, that we think is very important in sort of planning ahead for the needs of the next generation of teachers. And finally, providing just some recommendations, some high-level recommendations for everyone. Again, I won't read them through there for you, but just for you to have a little look at those. I think in many ways, as I said, the understanding of the workforce, the diversification of the workforce, a better realisation of what induction actually means, and using critical human resource applications and strategies will put us in a better position for the future. So I hope I went through that very rapidly. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand back to you, Tom, for questions and answers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simone. That was fabulous. Yeah, we'll jump to the Q&A now, and if people want to put your questions in there, but we're going to go to one from Ros Ward. And Amy, this is for you. Ros asks, did stayers in your research talk about school culture as a feature of what makes them stick at it, or pedagogical choices, i.e. a level of autonomy in their practice?
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks. Was it Ros? Yes and no. I guess most of the participant comments, I guess, were about how their schools were struggling to maintain any sense of kind of organizational capacity. A lot of the schools that we're in are managing quite crisis level situations with staffing. So they're spending a lot of time on recruitment, they're spending a lot of time on induction. That work's absorbed primarily by middle leaders. So sometimes you've got quite high levels of leadership turnover. So any sense that there's a stable school culture is actually is very difficult in any of those schools. The ones that our stayers could still find space in there, I guess you could say. They still managed to identify smaller teams of colleagues that they had strong collegial support from. And again, middle leaders bore a really heavy role in maintaining that. They do talk about their pedagogy, but because of the organizational kind of instability, it makes that fitting into an overall school culture a much more complicated act for them. So I hope that kind of gets to your question. Thanks.
And Amy, if I might follow up, and maybe this is just a question more broadly to the panel. School culture was something that was touched on in a number of presentations, or in the briefing document itself. I don't know if anyone else from the panel wants to jump in and talk about the importance of that in their research.
I might comment briefly that we found a lot of participants said they felt lucky to have had a good leader, lucky to have been assigned a colleague teacher in the next room who supported them. And I guess what we're trying to do is get to a position where it's not lucky at all, where it's actually just provided for all teachers so that they all have positive experiences. But I mean, as one example, one early career teacher was ready to give up in the first school she was posted to. She went on to casual teaching in the second year because she just couldn't hack it in that school. Was largely employed in one school during her casual teaching, had a fantastic experience, and everything was completely different. So I think school culture is absolutely huge in determining whether people stay or not. And that's partly up to the leader, and leaders, I think, do have a really critical role here, but I think it's not just the solo principal, it's how the principal works with colleagues and middle leaders to, ensure those positive environments, even in the most difficult of conditions, which we realise, is the challenge that some of you have talked about.
Tom, do you mind if I follow on?
Yes, please, Tim.
Yeah, just because Jenny's talked a fair bit there about leaders, and part of our data collection as was shared was our case studies. And so we spent, quite considerable time in schools working with principals, but all staff, to try to understand the emotional labour that principals were performing. And I guess one of the things we saw there was just how exhausting it was for the principals and other leaders to actually build those cultures that, perhaps create spaces where teachers want to actually hang around and progress their careers. So, there's an intense amount of emotional labour required to build those sorts of cultures, and that in itself is an issue of sustainability.
Great. Well, Tim, perhaps while you're still on the screen, there was a question from Tobias O'Connor, who I know you answered this in the chat, but I think it's a really great question. It was a number of questions here, but Tobias writes, concerns have been raised with our system regarding principals' apparent inability to switch off and take downtime after a crisis or critical incident. In very small schools, there are cases where the principal has been placed on medical leave and struggles to switch off because the system hasn't responded quickly enough with backfill or system access for others, such as approving invoices, rosters, staff leave processing, etc. As a result, the administrative burden persists for a period of time, even though they are medically unfit for work. What reasonable expectations should there be to switch off? Who gets a say in what's reasonable in the timeframes? Should leaders have individual agency or boundaries or guardrails supported or imposed by the system? I'll leave it there because the next bit goes off into the second part. But yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a good question, and thank you, Tobias. Thanks for your contributions to our project over the time. And these questions are really interesting because I guess what came through the data and it comes through that question is that sense of perhaps the role of the principal and even the teacher as being some sort of kind of never-ending role where they can never switch off. And lots of our principal testimonies, the 298 testimonies, talked about that kind of encroachment into their personal life. And I guess what we would say is that systems need to actually understand that, acknowledge that, and look at the labour of leaders and teachers, and I guess put some guardrails up around it. And just to flip it a little bit, one of the other things we noticed was that there are quite a lot of instruments and policies that have been developed over time by systems for the explicit purpose of trying to actually set up those guardrails and support work and support work health and safety. But there's some real issues around, for example, resourcing to ensure that those policies are enacted at the ground level, and also just communication through the hierarchies of the government. So, there might be a suite of policies. For example, Victoria in 2018, as part of our policy audit, we saw released a $61 million principal health and wellbeing policy package that had a whole heap of support there. But we also heard from principals in Victoria that they didn't really have any awareness of that or understanding of how that had actually impacted on their work. So it's a lot about that communication piece.
Thanks, Tim. Did you want to jump in, Amy?
If that's all right, quickly, Tom. In some of the work that we've done, we've been working with a concept called care exploitation, I guess, and I kind of think that maybe Tim and Tobias's comment might be kind of circling around some of those issues. We had a participant, or a number of participants actually, who described doing work from their hospital beds. So they were so worried about not having work prepared while they had to go to hospital for their colleagues, because they knew that they were putting more work on them by not being there, that they would work from their hospital bed. So I raised all these questions around not being able to draw boundaries, or that's how intensely they were prepared to support their colleagues, about a lack of sort of school support within that, or system support. And we actually came to a point where that systems actually almost continue to work because of teachers going above and beyond, and school leaders going above and beyond. And in the schools that we were at, we identified points at which that logic no longer can survive. It breaks because there's nothing more to give. But that phenomenon of care exploitation, we thought, was the best way that we could capture that consistently going above and beyond.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Go to a question now from Veronica Udall, who asks, and Martin, looks like this one's for you. Well, we'll start with you before we throw to the rest of the panel. But I'm interested in how we can define or describe teacher professionalism and or the exercise of professional autonomy as a critical component in teacher retention. So, Martin, do you want to take a stab at that one first?
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. And thanks, Veronica, and Grant's asked the same question. I think it's absolutely central. And I can see on this panel a huge number of people that have written about teacher professionalism as well. I think it's about respect for what teachers bring to the classroom, a respect for their knowledge, a respect for their understandings of young people in the classrooms. And I think that part of what we've been seeing over in recent times, and has contributed to the shortage and contributes to people leaving the profession, is when those key decisions which should be up to the teacher to make are being taken out of their hands, when they're having particular pedagogical strategies mandated for their classrooms, when they're given particular curriculum units to implement. And I see Grant raised the notion of curriculum making. I think that's one of the things that teachers do and that teachers love doing, and is part of a rewarding career, is having that opportunity to exercise professional judgment around curriculum. I think it's also linked to having a say in the running of the school and the way in which a school operates, and that, principals obviously are central here in terms of creating a culture which fosters professionalism. So I think there's multiple definitions of professionalism. We've written about some of those different definitions, but for me, it's about recognizing, I guess, teachers' capacity for undertaking their work in a way that doesn't have external influence is from non-educators, people who don't necessarily know about education. That's my view.
Thanks, Martin. Did anyone else want to touch on this idea of professionalism and autonomy?
I might just very quickly add the work that Sharon Parker does in WA on work. She talks about the importance of smart work, stimulating, where you feel a sense of mastery, where there's a sense of agency, where it's relational in valuable ways, and where the demands are tolerable. And I think it's quite a useful framework to think about both the possibilities but also the limits of professionalism for teachers. Leave it there, keeping it snappy.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question before we run out of time. And Jenny, while you're on the screen, I'll start with you. But Reese asked about the potential limiting impacts of mentor teachers on beginning teachers. If you could unpack that. And Simone and Amy, I think this idea might also cut across some of your research too, if you wanted to follow Jenny.
Yeah. Very quickly, I mean, we know Jeanette Long years ago wrote a piece called The Dark Side of Mentoring. Mentors can be fantastic and productive and supportive and all of those wonderful things that we would hope for. But they can also, many mentors have no training. They also have no time allocation to do the mentoring work in many situations. And so mentoring can be everything from that highly productive arrangement to something that's almost non-existent. It can be rigid sometimes, where the mentor expects certain things to be happening that may not align with the values of the early career teacher. Early career teachers can become dependent on the mentor for their sense of success. How did I go with this? Should I do whatever, which can actually hamper their growth because they don't develop confidence in their own capacity to judge what's happening or to develop their own sense of confidence. So it's not to say that mentoring's bad, but it's also quite a costly arrangement that isn't necessarily serving us well at the moment. So we have a paper calling Reshaping Mentoring or Rethinking, I've forgotten which one now, but to readdress some of these really critical issues about how we better support early career teachers than just assigning a mentor.
And I just support Jenny's thoughts there. And just as in this particular project that we were talking about, acknowledging the diversification of early career teachers and not thinking about a one-size-fits-all, I think it applies across the board for all of the different stages of a teaching career. And mentors, I think we need to think differently about workforce needs, who mentors, when, how, all of those sorts of things, and for principals, etc. So I think we're really seeing a change, and we need to think differently around the ways in which we best support our teaching profession as a whole.
I'll just jump in. We looked a lot at the hidden work of mentoring. So in hard to staff schools, you've got higher proportions of early career permission to teach teachers. So the mentoring burden in these contexts is particularly great. As Jenny mentioned, there's little time allocation, there's little resource allocation for that kind of work. And so if you've got a system that's addressed shortages by pumping teacher supply, there was the burden on mentoring, I guess, has been great. And some of those, the idea that mentors are, experienced or mid-career teachers is also problematic, because in the schools that we're in, anyone 2 to 3 years in can be mentoring junior staff. So it's a pretty tough scenario.
Right, just pausing to see if there are any final comments from anyone, but I think we are pretty well at time. I suppose just a couple of reflections from me to tie it all off. I think, as we've heard today, teacher retention isn't a problem that can be tackled at an individual level or at a school level. It's systemic. It requires sort of structural reform, resourcing, and sustained investment in both people and communities. And hopefully some of the research that's been shared today can can help inform those policy design going forward. And I'd encourage anyone listening today to reach out to any of our researchers. I think this was a pretty rapid fire way of delivering some high level insights, but all our panelists here today are more than happy to jump on a call and discuss in more detail their findings and their understandings of this tricky challenge. And I think it is something, as Simone mentioned a couple of times, there can't be a one-size-fits-all approach that's very context specific, but there are some key learnings for how to affect change on this tricky issue. So I'd just like to say thank you to all our panelists for their sharing today and the work that's gone into this, and thank you to all our attendees who so actively engaged in the session. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time. Bye.